equity, biodiversity, and sustainable blue economy. We're working very closely with Jennifer Norris, the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat for the Natural Resources Agency, and her team to advance the state's 30 by 30 initiative. And I'll share more about OPC's role a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide. Some quick background on how we got here. In October 2020, the Governor Newsom signed his Nature-Based Solutions Executive Order, elevating the role of natural and working lands in the fight against climate change and advancing biodiversity conservation as an administration priority. As part of this executive order, California committed to the goal of conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. The California Natural Resources Agency was tasked with implementation of the 30 by 30 initiative in partnership with state agencies, tribes, and stakeholders. The roadmap for this effort is the Pathways to 30 by 30 document, cover is shown here on the slide, which identifies opportunities and strategies to achieve 30 by 30 in California. Next slide. The Pathways document includes the map that you see here, which shows the initial baseline for areas conserved. And we have 4 strategies that I will walk through right now on how we intend to meet that 30% goal. So our California Science-Based Network of 124 MPAs, which covers 16% of state waters, meets the definition of conserved in the Pathways document because they provide durable protection and they are managed to sustain the integrity of marine ecosystems. And I want to be very clear that this does not mean that MPAs are the only way for the state to achieve 30 by 30. It simply means that at the time the Pathways document was released, we were able to conclusively determine that our MPA network did meet that definition. Other strategies may also contribute, as I will share in a moment, but additional work is needed to further understand the biodiversity benefits they provide. The first ever decadal management review of the MPA network is currently underway and scheduled to be received by the Fish and Game Commission in 2023. This review will help the state evaluate the extent to which MPAs are providing their intended ecological benefits. The results of the review may be used to develop recommendations on how we better manage our MPA network. However, prior to the completion of the review, MPA network expansion will not be a component of meeting the state's 30 by 30 marine conservation goals. With 16% of coastal waters already protected, we are focused on several additional strategies to get us to 30. California's national marine sanctuaries cover almost 41% of state waters, and they were created to establish to conserve unique and natural and cultural resources. Our sanctuaries include areas of exceptionally high biodiversity, and they provide important conservation benefits. But each one has different regulations and policies that will need to be assessed to determine whether they meet the Pathways definition of conserved. And we are working closely with our federal partners to evaluate the existing conservation measures in sanctuaries and identify any opportunities to strengthen biodiversity protections while also leveraging the state and federal 30 by 30 efforts. We're also exploring opportunities and options for California Native American tribes to establish indigenous marine stewardship areas that support and enhance tribal stewardship of coastal and ocean resources. Tribally led conservation is absolutely key to the success of the state's 30 by 30 effort, and the state needs to provide opportunities and funding to support tribes in leading conservation actions that help biodiversity in the state. California's coastal waters also include places that can be considered other effective conservation measures, or OECMs. These areas, such as de facto marine protected areas that restrict human activity for other reasons other than conservation, or existing closures established for the purposes of fisheries management, may have the potential to contribute to the state's 30 by 30 goal, but their durability and biodiversity benefits require further study. Next slide. Implementation of 30 by 30 in coastal waters is going to look a little bit different than what is being done on the land side. Because the ocean is a public trust resource and belongs to all of us, implementation really lends itself to a more centralized approach. And so to maximize collaboration and transparency, The Ocean Protection Council has a seat on the 30 by 30 coordinating committee and is serving as the entity that will coordinate, discuss, and facilitate discussions among tribes, fishermen, NGOs, and state and federal agency partners, and others. We're leading the development of a collaborative implementation roadmap for how we will achieve the pathways definition of 30% conserved for coastal waters, consistent with the approaches that I just described. Next slide. So what does that partnership look like and our role in it? We plan to engage with our sister state agencies throughout the process to ensure that implementation is aligned and coordinated with resource management priorities. We will lead tribal consultations, listening sessions, and other engagement opportunities to ensure that the voices of California Native American tribes are elevated and prioritized in 30 by 30 implementation. And we will establish opportunities for stakeholder input and discussion, like what we are starting here today, to understand environmental justice, conservation, access, fishing, and federal agency perspectives. And also key to this effort is investing in critical research needs to help identify areas that should be prioritized for strengthened biodiversity protections, such as areas of climate refugia, and strategies for strengthening those protections, like restoration of degraded habitats. We will need to continue investing in regular monitoring and evaluation to track progress in meeting the state's biodiversity goals, leveraging existing monitoring programs, considering traditional knowledges, and filling key data gaps. Next slide. So just a bit about how OPC will be helping support this work. We currently have a funding portfolio of around $230 million. This funding is to support all of the strategic plan priorities that I highlighted earlier. There are lots of overlaps between those plan priorities and the 30 by 30 priorities, including investments for sea level rise habitat vulnerability assessments, adaptation planning and resilience projects, habitat restoration and protection, research and monitoring, and land acquisition. Next slide, please. So as far as next steps go, after this meeting today, we plan to create set meetings for topical discussions to really dive deeply into our specific approaches focused on sanctuaries and other effective conservation measures. We want to finalize our priority science needs and then fund those needs to get that critical data into our decision making. We will initiate tribal consultation and listening sessions. And again, as a reminder, we will keep the survey open until December 16th and would appreciate any feedback that you would like to provide through that venue or this venue or our email address as well. So with that, thank you for your attention and patience. And I really want to open it now to answer any clarifying questions. And then we will shift gears to hear feedback on how to best engage with all of you as we move forward together. As a reminder, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and we will call on you and ask you to unmute.
Dan Robinette, I see you got your hand up. You should have the ability to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just wondering, I see an opportunity here, and I'm wondering if you guys are considering this. So a lot of the protected areas on land and at sea are kind of separate, right? Like, for example, the Marine Life Protection Act only goes up to mean high tide. Is there an opportunity to kind of cross over that land-sea boundary and protect some areas and establish that connectivity, you know, maybe at estuaries or even just some of the more coastal areas that are used by seabirds and pinnipeds, where you kind of have that overlap of sea and land?
Yes, Dan, thank you so much for that great suggestion. Absolutely, 100%. This is definitely a priority for us and really a key demonstration of why the partnership between what we're doing on the coastal side and what Dr. Norris is doing on the terrestrial side is so important, right? Like, we've kind of broken up these pieces for the purposes of trying to facilitate the best implementation mechanisms, but certainly those lines don't exist, right? And we're also thinking about that in the context of, there's no boundary between state and federal waters in our ocean. So where are those connections and the need to protect those boundaries for the benefits of biodiversity? So thank you.
All right, thanks for your question, Dan. Jim, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
We can.
Okay, great. I'm just going to repeat the question that I threw in the chat, which is you're talking about doing tribal consultations as part of this. I'm curious, is there a larger role that the Native Nations and the tribal peoples have in the actual planning and the designation, and especially in the management and possible income that could come from these conservation areas, both including designated protected areas or OECMs? So is their role bigger than just consultation? And if so, how does that work out?
So short answer, yes, absolutely. The role is larger than consultation and listening sessions. And you heard me talk about the potential to create these indigenous marine stewardship areas. We would not do that without very deep partnership with tribes to reflect their priorities, make sure that they have the management opportunities and responsibilities that go along with that. So this is a priority for the 30 by 30 initiative. It's also a priority for the Ocean Protection Council and the work that we do with tribes. So it goes above and beyond just consultations and listening sessions, really trying to identify opportunities for partnership and stewardship that are led by tribes.
So just one more thing, the indigenous marine stewardship areas, these are distinct designated sites that are labeled as such.
Yes, and they don't exist yet. So we're going to explore opportunities to create them. And so we welcome feedback on what those should look like. Initial thinking is, are there places or specific species or practices that we really need to be protecting in certain areas, but providing access for tribes for ceremony or other traditional use. So we're just at the very beginning stages of that and talking with some tribal partners, but we welcome recommendations.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. Richard Sadowski, good to see you, man. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Good seeing you too, bro. I just more of a comment, with the formation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary and the wind farm that Homefront EJ agrees that with the governor, it's going to take all hands on deck to get California decarbonized. There's a environmental justice issue, as all coastal communities realize, it's a housing thing. And I feel that with the state's leadership on this, several times I talked to people that, sanctuaries don't do certain things, but I think there's opportunity with the Chumash Heritage Sanctuary that we could integrate like a HUD program for not only some of the First Peoples, but also for academia, professors, and students that are working in the research and monitoring field, and citizen scientists working in that field to help with the housing issue and being able to stay in the area and then not lose that intellectual property because of housing. And I think that, since the wind farm is going to be a kind of a privatized thing, I think that should be funded upfront in perpetuity for programs like this. And I think that there's an opportunity there, maybe through easements going through the sanctuary, or, just an integration of, with state lands, and just an integration maybe of different lead state agencies to help with that environmental justice issue.
Thank you, Richard. Good to see you. And certainly the Ocean Protection Council and our sister state agencies are deeply involved in the offshore wind development. And I will be sure to relay that suggestion onto the relevant folks who are working on this.
All right, thanks, Richard. Glenn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Glenn Spain with Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, PCFFA. As you know, we're the largest organization of commercial fishing families in the West Coast. We need to be much more involved in this, and we need you to make sure that there is a place at the table for the fishing industry, which is a major ocean user, and that the process of creating protected areas takes into account the Pacific Fishery Management Council's already well-defined essential fish habitat protections. It takes into account a lot of areas that are set aside for various other reasons. And particularly, I would invite you to come and talk to the Habitat Committee of the Pacific Fishery Management Council. I sit on that Habitat Committee as a commercial fishing rep. And talk to us about how this can work together. Theoretically, it's possible for NPAs, for instance, to benefit fisheries. But if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, protecting the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, they do harm rather than good. We need to make sure these things are all aligned up so that we are not basically seeing this as a threat, but as a benefit. It can be either, depending on how it's structured and whether it's structured in a thoughtful way, with fishing interests and with the fishing community and with the fishery managers in a way that makes sense. So I really urge you to move forward on that, and I will certainly be continue to be involved with this process.
Thank you so much, Glenn, and we really appreciate your feedback and the invitation to come speak with the Habitat Committee. And certainly, this is the table. We are at the table. So anyone who wants to participate, that's going to be the second part of our conversation. Like, how do we do that together, and what's the best way to engage with us and to make sure that we're communicating out?
One final point.
Sure.
The problem I have is, okay, we designate 30%. What's the 30% of what? And why 30%? Why not 25? Why not 35? We're faced with sort of a mandate from above to do something, anything, so long as it gets to 30%. We got to do it smart. We can get a great deal of benefit out of less area if we do it well. And that's the important thing, is to get this aligned so that it benefits us, benefits ocean ecosystems, restricts other activities like offshore wind, offshore oil development. Offshore oil rigs are being disposed of. There's a lot of talk about that. That's all going to impact us. And we want this to be not an impact, but a benefit.
Yes, completely agree. And just to reiterate that this is about understanding the breadth of threats that are facing the ocean, right? So it's not just fishing, and we've been, I think, very clear in saying that, but water quality, oil development, other things, climate, and how do we do the best to protect biodiversity in coastal waters based on the threats that we're facing. So that is a big priority for us. Thank you, Glenn.
One last point. One of the ironies of marine protected areas is they're protected against fishing, but not offshore oil development, not pollution, not oil rigs and rigs to reef kind of deals.
Right.
All of that is possible within an MPA, and those threats are not going away.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenn. Larry, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Appreciate the opportunity here today. Larry Phillips, the American Sport Fishing Association. I appreciate Mr. Spain's comments. We remain, I don't know if frustrated is the right word, but primarily in the decision to establish the coordinating council and the representation from the various interests there. That, from our perspective, the fishing industry has the most to lose here relative to changes in how we operate, restrictions on the coast of California. We are 100% supportive of efforts to protect biodiversity. We were one of the first organizations to sign on with the Biden administration's initial proposals that would have protected 30% of marine water in off the Pacific coast, off the coast in federal waters. And so I guess a few questions. We also feel strongly that the regulatory process of managing fisheries should be solely placed in the professionals' hands. Those would be California Fish and Wildlife staff and also the Pacific Fisheries Management Council staff to guide us on the benefits and the need for conserving specific resources there. We're coming off a great example of a success story there with cowcod and yellow eye rockfish across the coast, where we addressed the need. We all of us made difficult decisions to restrict fisheries across a wide range of ports, and we're happy to report that this is a huge success story from all the fisheries, and it was the result of a platform that works. It's transparent, it's clearly identified, easy to follow, and we strongly recommend we stick with that proposal. One of the questions I think all of us continue to struggle with is the difference between protected and conserved. The Biden administration clearly had a different set of criteria that were being used to identify define those terms, and at least at this point, the response we've gotten from California Natural Resource Agency is that we haven't included things like national marine sanctuaries. It was refreshing to hear that we are reviewing that and looking for opportunities to include those waters that are national sanctuaries. So that's encouraging. But we're still struggling with just the definitions, and again, consistent with what Mr. Spain said, we just need to better understand this so we can find a pathway to collectively move forward in a way that really addresses the needs relative to biodiversity. So again, we don't feel we have a voice in the coordinating council, so we appreciate this opportunity and additional opportunities to engage with the managers. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Larry. Cindy, you have the floor.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Jen. I have maybe an easy one for you. This is a clarifying question. I'm curious when you all expect the roadmap of sort of the engagement process and the timelines. And can you talk a little bit about that as you're developing that process, any public engagement opportunities to kind of review that document as you're putting it together? Thank you.
Well, I don't know that when I said roadmap, I don't know that we had a plan for an actual subsequent document. It's really about how we're going to implement the approaches and strategies in the pathways document, given that we still have a lot of outstanding questions. So, just to go back to Larry's point, sanctuaries, indigenous marine stewardship areas, and other conservation measures, those are all places where we need additional information and exploration to understand, how we can count those towards meeting the definition of conserved. And just to reiterate, in the pathways document, the definition of conserved is the area is durably protected, and it provides protection for ecosystems, right? So it's not just species by species, but we're protecting the biodiversity of full ecosystems. So Cindy, as far as the public engagement piece, I really want to dig into that in the second half of the discussion to really understand how folks want to engage. So we can do the breadth of you can sign up for our listserv, or you can be part of a working group that's focused on a specific topic or topics or all the topics. And we haven't fully mapped that out yet, but it is going to be a very open and transparent process for all that want to participate. So I guess that's a little bit of a stay tuned as we work on that together.
Thanks, Cindy. Jim, you have the floor.
Yeah, I was interested in the concept of the sea level rise habitat vulnerability assessment. And I was just wondering, is that just going to point out what vulnerabilities are, or will that develop general strategies for reducing the vulnerability? And I'm particularly concerned with intertidal habitat, which will disappear if we only conserve and don't figure out how to protect those habitats. So will that assessment talk about approaches in general to protect the functions and values of those habitats, or will it look at individual areas and suggest specific remedies for individual areas within the 30 by 30 area?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. We are also equally concerned about intertidal and other habitats. And this is a priority that Ocean Protection Council is actually already funding. So we have provided funding for baseline habitat inventory for wetlands, beaches, and intertidal habitat, and with the goal of understanding what our baseline is today, overlaying various sea level rise scenarios to understand the breadth of potential risk and habitat loss, and then to inform resilience plans that are required for us to develop as part of our strategic plan. So how do we build resilience for beach, intertidal, and wetland habitat in the face of sea level rise? So this is a huge priority for us, and just a great example of how the priorities of the Ocean Protection Council itself are overlapping and overlaid with the 30 by 30 priorities.
Well, will you have the resources to actually do demonstration projects to evaluate what things work out and what sort of habitats and which ones don't?
Yes.
Or will some other agency be doing that?
Yes, Ocean Protection Council will have that investment opportunity.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thanks for your comments. Steve, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. Hi, Steve.
Thank you. Steve Scheibelauer of the business Marine Alliances Consulting. And my question is, when the state says it wants to explore enhancing the federal National Marine Sanctuary Management capabilities, what do you mean? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So there might be, and this is where we get back to, what are the threats in each of these sanctuaries? What are the, the most pressing threats that we should be addressing? So there may be places where we've got water quality issues that would benefit from having some additional protections or strengthened protections. We also have been talking quite a bit about mandatory ship vessel speed reductions, right? So we've got voluntary speed reductions now to minimize impacts to whales, but there may be a need for making that mandatory that would really strengthen biodiversity protection. So those are a couple examples of the types of things that we could look at within the sanctuaries, depending on what the threats are that are facing. We also talk a bit about habitat restoration and the ways in which, and I do not have all the answers on this, but the ways in which that we can build resiliency in the face of climate change. So those are all topics for discussion that we're having with the leadership at sanctuaries.
All right, thank you, Steve. Jamie, you have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Diamond. I own Stardust Sport Fishing out of Santa Barbara, California. We take people fishing. We are ocean access for the people that can't afford their own boat, which is the majority of people. Whether it be whale watching, fishing, all of these activities happen in water. And if we can't have access to it, then they don't have access to it. And that's a huge concern. For us as the commercial passenger fishing vessels, our biggest concern is the fact that the only fishing representation is a trout group. And that's pretty disturbing, considering we're talking about marine resources and there's nobody really representing marine resource users as far as we go. And I think Glenn was kind of getting to that as well. The concept of letting the fisheries managers be the ones who decide fisheries management. As Glenn also stated, we have the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, we have Pacific States Marine Fisheries, we have the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they're the ones that manage fishing. And it should be left to them because they have that information, they have the data, they know where the essential fish habitats are, they know where sensitive ecosystems are, they know all this, they have all this information. And to have another agency come through and kind of say, well, we're going to recreate the wheel, it's a huge misuse of time and resources. But also, as Glenn was saying, and Larry as well, it needs to be done right. And you can close off a whole area, but it's not actually going to benefit. And so doing this right and having the right people at the table is really important. And so I just want to put this out there again, as others have already done. And I know you mentioned, well, this is the area for people to participate, but really there needs to be stakeholders representing marine fisheries, not just a trout group. And I'm sure they're doing a fabulous job on the freshwater resources, but we really need to have somebody representing our groups, our interests, whether it be commercial and sport combined, recreational, but we need to have somebody representing marine fisheries at that table. Thank you.
So if I might, I'm just going to thank you so much for your comments, Jamie. I just want to take a moment to provide a little bit of clarification on the coordinating committee. So the coordinating committee is serving as an entity for kind of pulling in information on how we're achieving 30 by 30, right? So it's not the place where we're having discussions like this. So while I understand that when you look at the makeup of the membership, there could be concerns about not having your perspective represented on that committee, I want to just continue to assure you that the place to provide meaningful feedback on your perspective is here with us and in our subsequent engagement. So, and we welcome that, and we want to hear from you, and we want to understand how to best communicate out. So just wanted to say that.
Jamie, I still see you still got a quick comment there.
Oh, Mike, we can't hear you.
Quick follow-up would be, when are the regional groups going to be happening? At what point will there be regional meetings like this where it speaks to specific areas?
Jamie, that is a great question. And that is what we want to kind of dig into in the next part of the discussion. So I definitely want to try to wrap up this portion and then get to the engagement piece, because that's really helpful for me to hear that's a desire and an interest, right? Yep. Regional groups in person. Do we want to do it remotely? Do we want to do it topical? Do we want to just do commercial fishing? Do we want everyone at the table? So we want that feedback. So let's see if we can maybe get through really quickly the last few people who have their hands up, and then I want to turn to that.
Yeah, so can you guys hear me okay? Hopefully. So that'll be Devin, Mark, Mike Conroy, and then Dan. So we'll just get through those four and then move to the community engagement portion. So Devin, you have the floor.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to comment. My name is Devin O'D. I'm with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I just wanted to kind of throw out there, flag, and maybe spark a conversation on how moving forward citizen science anglers can be kind of integrated into the efforts for monitoring and also understanding what's happening, in some of these local areas in these regions, and how, shore-based fishing, diving, commercial, recreational, and even beyond just the angling community, but into the outdoor recreation community. Like what steps are going to be taken, and what investments are being made or planned at this stage to scale up and integrate sort of that ability to collect data on the ground when you're out on the water or in some of these areas where we're looking to collect information. And so there's a number of species that the primary source of data collection for the Department of Fish and Wildlife is through angling. And I just want to flag that and hopefully encourage that sort of debate or conversation on how to integrate folks in the field that are willing and interested in contributing to science-based management, and give them that opportunity and understanding of how they can kind of support conservation on the ground while they're also doing what they love to do. So as much as we can be involved and help with that effort, I would love to be a part of that conversation and to kind of hear how that's progressing and moving forward in the process.
Thanks, Devin. We will definitely take you up on that.
All right, Mark, you have the floor.
All right, thanks very much. Michael and Jen. I'm Mark Gorelnik, and I've got a lot of comments, but I'm going to try to keep it to a minute or so.
Thank you.
Sure. I know that this is the first, at least for me, and hopefully a sequence of just substantive discussions on the topic. I'm actually on the aforementioned Pacific Fishery Management Council representing the state of California. I guess I want to say first that we hear the term protect, but that's not a self-defining term. So I appreciate the use of the term conservation, because that distinguishes the effort here from preservation. And I want to try to keep the effort here on conserving biodiversity, and as opposed to preserving or preventing use, because use, particularly in this case, I'll speak on behalf of the recreational fishing community, is completely consistent with conserving biodiversity. In fact, it's in our interest to conserve biodiversity. But you've sensed, I think, here from a number of speakers, sensitivity amongst the fishing community. And that's because, as has been mentioned, we've got, of the user groups, we've got the most to lose here. There's history where we've lost access, and in a process that not everyone was satisfied with. So that's the source of the sensitivity here. That's not to say our goals are different than the OPCs. We just want to make sure this is done in a way that does not unnecessarily restrict access. Access should be restricted where it's necessary, and it should not be restricted. We need to provide these recreational opportunities. I want to focus most of my comments on sanctuaries. As I'm sure you're aware, all of the national marine sanctuaries, including the portions that are in California coastal waters, are deemed marine protected areas by the federal government. And so I'm a little confused by the uncertainty about whether the sanctuaries protect biodiversity, because of course that's amongst their charges, is to protect resources under their jurisdiction. And something like 88% of sanctuary waters don't have restrictions on fishing, no additional restrictions on fishing besides that which is provided by the Pacific Fishery Management Council. 4% are closed. And those closed areas, they were not closed by the sanctuaries, they were closed by the Pacific Fishery Management Council, because the sanctuaries come to the council when they feel that additional fishery restrictions are necessary to conserve sanctuary resources. And I think that's the model that should be followed here. You mentioned water quality being a potential issue. There are already in all of the California sanctuaries regulations, which I believe are as enduring as any other regulations, that prohibit any discharges, terrestrial or otherwise, that harm sanctuary resources. So there are regulations in terms of water quality. I believe if they're not adequate, I'd like to understand why. So again, I would encourage the OPC and the Natural Resources Agency to take a better look at the sanctuaries. And I think the burden is going to be, since they're deemed MPAs and they're deemed conserving of biodiversity at the federal level, I guess I guess the burden's on someone who says it's not, because I think the protections are there, and there's a process for additional restrictions. I guess one question I have, you've indicated a couple of times.
Hey, Mark, I'm really sorry, but I just want to make sure that we've got equitable distribution of people being able to speak. So
can I ask one question and get an answer offline?
Sure.
I'd like to know who you're working with at National Marine Sanctuaries leadership. You've mentioned that twice.
We're working with all of the superintendents and the West Coast Regional Director.
Bill Duros.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Mike Conroy, you have the floor, and then Dan. And Laura and David, I see you also have your hands up. If you can put your comments or your questions in the chat, we're taking note of everything that's in the chat for following up later on. So Mike, you should have the ability to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, thanks. Confirming you can hear me?
Confirmed.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, I just want to align myself with the comments made by Larry, Glenn, Steve, Mark, and then Jamie. I also want to point out, fully agree with Jamie's point, the commercial passenger vessels provide access to the living marine resources off the state for those who don't have their own boats. Just want to point out that the commercial fishing industry provides that same access to those resources for folks that don't have boats and don't live close enough to the ports and harbors to go out and partake in the opportunities that Jamie and her business provides folks. My main concern and primary concern is that, current ocean users are not sort of fitting the bill for impacts to biodiversity coming from other new and proposed uses. For example, and I'm going to harp on offshore wind here a little bit. Just yesterday, a study came out that showed that offshore wind impacts marine ecosystems, impacts zooplankton, impacts all sorts of things that provide the primary food source and food web for many fish species and marine mammals. Another news story came out yesterday that offshore wind is going to has a high likelihood of increasing the extinction of the northern right whale on the East Coast due to impacts to prey distribution. So I would hope that we aren't on the hook to fit the bill for that, and that OPC, when it's looking at impacts to biodiversity from other new alternative uses, considers those impacts as well. And I'll throw those studies and that news article from Bloomberg into the chat so folks have access to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. And Dan, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I definitely want to back up Mike and say that, charter boats are a great way for people to get out there. My family's angler obsessed and been heading out of Hellgrins out of Oceanside since Nixon was president. And in that time, we've just seen incredible change, really freaky change over what we're pulling up. And I'm like everyone else on this call, I'm really scared about what we're seeing in the acceleration of things like starfish wasting disease, wiping out ecosystems, dinoflagellate blooms, taking out 100-million-year-old species, and single heat events killing 1 billion rocky intertidal inverts. And we're only just getting started. Sea level rise hasn't yet kicked in. So, the threats are super real, but it's great that we've got some real opportunities. The state is focusing on things and putting money into it, centering equity in tribes. And then we've got incredible technologies like eDNA that can finally help us see the biodiversity that we have, which for many clades, we may only have 10% of the species known to science. So we've got these great tools. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who's working on this. Thank you, Jen and Mike. Thank you and Godspeed in saving our oceans, our fish, and our families. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Great way to close it. No pressure. I appreciate it. Well, I see we have just a little bit of time left. I want to just thank everyone who is here and has provided comment, and again, reiterate that we are open to receiving all the feedback in any way you want to provide it. And I want to turn now towards hearing from everyone about how we best engage. So I heard Jamie share a hope for regional workshops. We had suggested that we were going to put together topical workshops on, specific issues. Is there a desire to have kind of stakeholder specific meetings? So do we want to just meet with, the environmental community or the fishing community or access community? I just want to hear all the ideas and the best way that we can engage. And then the other thing is, if you have suggestions for us about how we clearly communicate the state's approach and next steps, that would be helpful as well. And I think please just feel free to, you can just raise your hand or come off mute and share your thoughts.
I do need folks to raise their hands just because it's a web, or it's because of the security controls. I just need you guys to ask to raise your hand, and then I'll ask you to unmute. But yeah, open floor for discussion.
Thanks, Mike.
Judith, go ahead.
Hi, I really appreciate this presentation, this session for people to get together, and the commitment to transparency. Will you soon, or are you in the works of creating something on your webpage that will allow people an opportunity to see what's happening? I know that when you launch this, there's about 150 things happening all at once, but being able to sign up for the listserv, being informed of when the meetings are, just some one-stop shopping so that nobody's surprised and go, I didn't know.
Thank you, Judith. I think so there is an overarching website for the 30 by 30 initiative as a whole. If there is a need for more specific landing spot for the coastal waters portion, which I think could be of benefit, we're definitely open to creating something like that on our website.
All right, thank you for your comment. Richard, you have the floor.
Hi, Jen, thanks for kind of bringing that up. I think that we should have all the people together, maybe in a regional area. We should be able to have dialogue with the fishermen and environmental justice groups, citizen science groups that are working on the local area. Maybe looking at it as a hub, for instance, taking a state marine reserve or an MPA and circling around that and then expanding that and lacing a tapestry of environmental justice into that discussion. But I think that we need to have all the groups together in one room where we could meet personally or on video. Thanks.
That sounds great. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Justin, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Robbins, and I serve as the general manager for Resort Improvement District Number 1. We're a small special district in Shelter Cove on the Humboldt County coastline. And I just want to offer to OPC that my community, my district would be willing to host a regional meeting for the North Coast. We have public meeting facilities here in Shelter Cove. And we would love to be a part of the discussion. There's small amount of commercial fishing that occurs in Shelter Cove. There's small amount of sport fishing that occurs here. And we're adjacent to marine protection areas and a lot of other protected lands. So we're very interested in the 30-30 initiative and appreciate the opportunity to comment. And Jen and Michael, I can pass my information on to you guys at another time if you want to reach out and if we want to set up a regional meeting here in Shelter Cove. Thank you so much.
That would be great, Justin. Thank you so much for the offer, and it'd be great to connect offline.
Thanks, Justin. Marianne, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Jen and Michael. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. You talked about different community groups. I'd encourage some outreach to local government, to the boards of supervisors in particular. They have land use decision making. They try to at least integrate all the threads that come together in their community, and very interested in the 30 by 30 initiative. So I think it'd be worthwhile to have an opportunity to chat with them. We're happy to host something if that is helpful.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you so much, Marianne.
Of course.
Thank you. I don't.
Oh, go ahead.
Another hand raised, Anupa. Let me ask you to unmute. You should have the floor.
All right, thank you. I just, wanted to emphasize that this isn't necessarily in this room a representative sample of the folks that use the ocean, rely on the ocean. There's a lot of members from the fishing community, but I wouldn't say that the fishing community in and of itself is well represented. So, I know the Coastal Commission's EJ strategy has a lot of great kind of environmental justice considerations for gathering public comment. So I hope you could maybe consider incorporating some of those into, whatever future versions of these public comment opportunities that you have. But I would also suggest, similar to Richard's comments, are there local community groups that you can engage with so we get a more representative sample of the folks that use the ocean, whether it's dive shops, maybe surf clubs. There are a lot of really great new groups bringing people of color and environmental justice in underserved communities and giving them the opportunity to connect with the ocean. And I would love to hear, their perspectives represented in fora like this. Having a meeting like this in the middle of the day is also going to exclude people. So making sure that we have opportunities and really get the word out in a lot of different ways so that we get a better representation of voices.
Thank you, Anupa. I completely agree.
Thanks, Anupa. Laura, you have the floor.
Hey, yeah, this is Laura with Surfrider. Good point from Anupa there. And speaking of commenting at Coast Commission meetings, one way to maybe integrate the two would be to see some comparison of the sea level rise action plan principles with what's going on here at 30 by 30, because a lot of us NGOs look at those commitments in that plan and wonder how they're going to get integrated. So it'd be awesome to see you guys lead some sort of comparison or conversation around that.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Other comments? Please feel free to raise your hand. Judith, I see you've got your hand up. You have the floor.
I came in late and put a question in the chat. What's the overall timeline that OPC is thinking this 30 by 30 program for the coastal component is going to last, or this initial phase?
I mean, we have until 2030 to get to 30. And we're just trying to start to really align on those approaches that I described earlier and understand, you know, this meeting is a critical kind of first step on the implementation path for us. We really wanted to start hearing from interested stakeholders in the community that cares about the coast and ocean. And you know, Anupa, your point is so well taken about that this is just a very small snapshot of people who care about the coast and ocean in California. And so I just see this as, you know, we're going to be doing this process until we meet the administration's goal of conserving 30% by 2030. So we'll have some more clarity on near-term next steps after we have time to digest all the feedback we received today. And then we'll be sharing that out with everyone, along with, you know, we have some work to do on developing outreach materials and kind of a broader communication strategy to make sure that people do understand what's going on, understand how to engage, and understand kind of timeline and next steps. So those are some high points on my to-do list.
Thank you.
Other comments?
I saw Sandy Ellsworth raise her actual hand.
Let's go to
I don't know if you can
Adina.
unmute her if she doesn't raise her virtual hand, Mike.
I can, but I just need to find her. So let's go to Adina, whose virtual hand is raised, and then I will go look for Sandy's actual hand.
There she is.
Cool.
Adina, you should have the floor.
Thank you. Regarding, you know, discussion groups and how to communicate, I thought one approach of doing that is based on the list of priority areas and people's interests to have the discussions surrounded around that. So for example, people interested in or working on MPAs, fisheries, you know, wetlands or nature-based solutions, and have discussions centered around these priority areas would be another approach as opposed to just regional.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Adina.
Thanks, Adina. And Sandy, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mike. Anupa already shared NRDC's more substantive comment. I just wanted to thank OPC for taking this on. We recognize that this is kind of an initial pass at outreach, and we support your efforts to have, you know, an even more inclusive group of people coming together in the future. And we also just wanted to reiterate our support for really robust implementation of the 30 by 30 initiative, because it is an incredibly important and noble effort that the world is taking on to stem the biodiversity crisis. And California, of course, has a critically important leadership role to play. So we just wanted to thank you for your efforts and to let you know that we are really eager to be involved and constructive and supportive, however we can be.
I promise I didn't plant her, but that was an excellent closing, Sandy. Thank you so much. I just want to thank all of you. I know getting an hour in the middle of your day is difficult. We're all very busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come and share your perspectives. And you will be hearing from us again very soon. So thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.